are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joining me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man. So, continuing on with our off-season coverage for the 2022 off-season. Again, if you haven't caught the last few episodes, first off, definitely check them out. We were basically doing off-season outlooks or what's next episodes for some of the eliminated playoff teams so far. Now we're going to start to get into some of the, teams that were either didn't make the playoffs or were eliminated very early on. And the two teams on this episode that we want to talk about are probably two of the most noteworthy teams basically since the beginning of the playoffs, because A, one team didn't make it, and B, the other team completely flamed out.
Since the beginning of the season.
Pretty much. Like, these were very heavy title favorites, and they disappointed in their own respects. We're talking about the Los Angeles Lakers and the Brooklyn Nets. But before we even get started, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on YouTube, of course, but Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio. Basically, wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us. We're the Up and Under podcast. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more future off-season content coming from us in the very near future. But speaking of the Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Lakers, now, it would be only fair that we start off with the Brooklyn Nets here, just because they were the only one of these two teams that actually made the playoffs. Now, the Brooklyn Nets, they finished with a 44-38 record. Now, that's great and all, but they had to basically play in the play-in tournament, which, credit to them, they won. They won the play-in tournament. They earned the 7th seed. But that was basically about all the positives you can take about the Brooklyn Nets playoff run. They finished the year 11th in offensive rating, 19th in defensive rating, and 15th in net rating. But overall, it was just a disappointing year. And it's kind of funny because they were the title favorites heading into the season, especially after, you make the big splash last season to get James Harden, to pair him with Kyrie and KD, and then you got all the vets back. Like, it looked like one of those super team championship caliber teams. But man, there was just a lot going on in Brooklyn, and it ultimately ended with basically the team imploding in the worst way possible. They got swept by the Boston Celtics in the first round of the playoffs. And now the Brooklyn Nets are just left with a ton of questions. And I think a lot of the controversy and a lot of the chaos really started from Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving and his whole COVID situation really affected this team. Not only was he not available for basically majority of the season, he turned into a part-time player for times. It was just crazy how, he basically did it on purpose. He refused to want to get a vaccine. He didn't want to play. And the talks with him being away from the team and not involved, it really affected the morale, really affected the chemistry. It really affected Kevin Durant, to be honest with you, because he kept getting asked about Kyrie Irving.
And I mean, he's the one that came to Brooklyn because of Kyrie Irving.
Exactly. So the fact of the matter is that Kyrie Irving really created a lot of these issues. Now, again, was it his fault that the rules were put into place that affected him? No, but it was his fault that he chose not to get vaccinated. And he chose not to abide by those rules, which ultimately costed his team significantly. But yeah, I still say Kyrie Irving is one of the most unreliable players, basically of the season, or maybe in the last few years, man. Because he's literally, you don't know what you're gonna get. The crazy part is when he actually did play, he played in 29 games this past season. He put up insane numbers. Like, the guy put up, I think, 27 a game, around 6 assists, 5 rebounds. Again, shooting about 50% from the field.
Bro, he was having games where he was shooting like 70% from the field. And
Kyrie Irving is
crazy.
Still one of the most talented guys in the league.
In history.
Yeah, in history. Again, there's no denying about what the player Kyrie Irving is. But the fact of the matter is, if he's not there and not playing, what good is he, actually? So that was number one. The second thing is James Harden. And James Harden clearly couldn't handle the pressure of playing in Brooklyn. He also didn't like being a number 2 option to Kevin Durant, which, again, I don't know what he expected when he decided to ask to come to Brooklyn, but he basically came there. Not to mention he also battled injuries and was nowhere near the same player he used to be. So he asked out, again, of another team, and eventually he got traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for Ben Simmons. And, again, we still don't know how the Ben Simmons experiment is going to work for the Nets, but I guess getting Seth Curry and Andre Drummond was still some pretty good moves for the Brooklyn Nets, all things considered. And then finally, I guess you can chalk up the season to injuries. Kevin Durant and Joe Harris, they basically battled injuries the whole season. And yet Kevin Durant was still trying to carry this team as much as he could. But ultimately, the team was too old. It wasn't deep enough. And again, nobody on the roster played a full season. So pretty much it was a disaster year for the Brooklyn Nets overall. Which brings us into some of the notable free agents for the Nets heading into this upcoming offseason. First and foremost, and I just alluded to, Kyrie Irving has a player option for about $35 million this upcoming season. So again, it's yet to be seen whether or not he's going to opt in or if he's going to try to look for an extension somehow. But man, I just don't see the Nets. I don't see the Nets reliably re-signing him for anything that he expects to get. Then Patty Mills also has a player option. I believe it's worth around $7 to $8 million. Again, he can either take it or he can simply just go to a better contender, in my opinion. Bruce Brown is an unrestricted free agent. Yet to be seen if he will be back with the team. Again, he'll probably want to demand a contract raise.
He's gonna get a pretty solid raise.
He definitely deserves to get a raise, but again, he needs to also improve in my books as well to be effective on the Nets. LaMarcus Aldridge is an unrestricted free agent as well.
He might just retire, to be honest.
Pretty much. Like he's old and yeah, he's just not.
And again, it was a big signing for them last season, and even this year coming back. So shout out to LaMarcus Aldridge for coming back this year. But then by the end of the season, he wasn't playing at all. Like the Nets were starting. What's his name? Carson Edwards? No, Carson Edwards is the point guard. I can't remember what his name.
Well, there's Nick Claxton, but you know.
Well, yeah, but when they were playing Nick Claxton and Carson something. Oh, Kessler Edwards.
Kessler Edwards. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So LaMarcus Aldridge again. He's an unrestricted free agent, but will he be back? Probably not. Next is Blake Griffin. Now Blake Griffin, he was pretty bad. Like I'm sorry. Like Blake Griffin is incredibly washed.
Again, he's had his moments of being like the hustle guy, which he's kind of transformed himself into in Brooklyn. And again, that could be valuable for a team, to have like an end of the bench guy who hustles like the way Blake Griffin did.
He was also playing way too many minutes in Brooklyn, to be honest with you, in terms of where he's at in his career. Like he should not be playing that many minutes, and that pretty much led to him being pretty ineffective. Next, Andre Drummond. He actually might be back. It might not be. He played pretty well for the Nets. I think they might actually re-sign him. Now, for what number, that's to be seen, but Andre Drummond, definitely a good one. Nick Claxton actually is a restricted free agent. He will be probably sought after because he actually showed some pretty good promise with the Nets this past season. Now, obviously, he still needs some polish on his offensive game, but defensively...
Work on your free throw shooting, please.
He definitely needs to work on his free throws. But again, at least defensively, he's pretty solid. He's quick, he's mobile. Again, he just needs to polish up that offensive game.
He's basically the prototypical modern center.
Pretty much. Next is Goran, higher ambitions Dragic. Unrestricted free agent right there.
Going to the Mavericks.
Oh, well, I guess so. Unless they don't have higher ambitions, I don't know. But Goran Dragic, who cares? David Duke Jr. is an unrestricted free agent as well. So the Brooklyn Nets have a lot of notable free agents heading into the offseason. Which brings me into their team needs. What do the Nets actually need to do heading into this offseason? And I think first and foremost, and you might think this is a controversial take, but I think you need to get rid of Kyrie Irving. I think personally he's too unreliable, and frankly, he doesn't seem to care enough about basketball to be on a contending team. And Kevin Durant, he needs a reliable co-star. He clearly cannot do it by himself. And the fact is, again, Kyrie Irving was the reason Kevin Durant came to Brooklyn over other teams. And I think he's the reason the team isn't living up to expectations at all.
And I mean, I guess he'll talk about this a bit later as well. But the issue is that who really wants Kyrie Irving? Ideally, everyone would want him. But again, considering...
Well, talent-wise, yes.
If he was on a team not named the Brooklyn Nets, would he actually be in the NBA? I don't think so. I don't think he would be playing anywhere else.
It's a very tough question to answer. And we'll discuss that a little later as well on the potential, like how do you move Kyrie Irving and all that stuff. So again, I think they should move Kyrie Irving. It should be the first thing they should do. The second thing I think the Brooklyn Nets should do, they need to get a second star for Kevin Durant. He clearly can't do it all by himself. We've already established this. And I think the Nets owe it to Kevin Durant because the fact is he also re-upped with them and signed a 4-year extension with this team. And if he doesn't get a second option, that's bad on the Brooklyn Nets, the front office. Because basically Kevin Durant is like, listen, I'm putting my faith in you. Now you got to reciprocate that and build a contender around me. So, and you still have Ben Simmons. Now, even if Ben Simmons doesn't improve from where we saw him in Philadelphia, that's still a good enough third guy in the NBA. You just got to get that second guy, and then you might have something there. But
I think the main thing is second guy offensively.
Yeah.
Right? Because, again, if Kyrie plays like the way peak Kyrie can play, and you have Ben Simmons for his defense, playmaking, then you have a real shot at winning. The issue is Kyrie Irving's issues compounded with Ben Simmons' issues. There's a lot of questions at that point.
Which is exactly what I was bringing up about Ben Simmons, is that if this guy actually plays or not, and I'll get to that in just a bit. But yeah, those are I would say the big ones. You got to get rid of Kyrie Irving, and then you got to find someone to replace Kyrie Irving. The third thing I think the Nets should be looking into is they need to get younger. This team is too old. They have too many washed veterans on this team, as we alluded to, listing out the free agents. And they just need to get younger. Or at the very least, if you're going to get veteran guys, get the guys that aren't washed. Get the guys that can still contribute in some capacity. And that's the biggest thing. Like, when you're talking about you're playing Blake Griffin, too many minutes. He's not being effective. LaMarcus Aldridge basically became unplayable. There were times Patty Mills looked old.
Patty Mills was pretty bad towards the end of the season.
Beginning of the season, he was amazing. He couldn't miss. But then, again, age is a factor for him. Higher ambitions, Dragic, again, clearly wanted higher ambitions, but he's not higher ambitions. But yeah, I think the long story short is that the Nets need to get younger. They need to get some guys who can contribute right now and not players that don't get the 2016 All-Stars. It's not 2016 anymore. But yeah. And again, speaking of roster tweaks, they need defenders. The Nets finished 19th in defensive rating. And again, Kevin Durant's a pretty good defender. But when you're trying to have him score like 35 points a game just for you to barely scrape by.
And at his age, too. He's not young anymore.
No, and again, he also has an injury history and all that stuff. So the fact of the matter is, you need other guys to defend in order to at least make Kevin Durant's scoring worth anything. It's no point of the Nets can score like a bajillion points, but then give up the same amount on the other end. So they need to get guys who can defend, and ideally, you need to get them at a pretty cheap price, which again brings me to my next point. You got to get rotation players who are cheap but effective. And this is the problem that a lot of these contenders that have spent big money on their top guys have. Like the Nets now have, at least for now, they have Kevin Durant making around $42 million. Kyrie Irving, if he opts in, about 36. Ben Simmons making about 35. That's a lot of money given to three guys where two of the three we have no idea if they're going to play or not. So the fact of it is that the Nets are going to have to sign players for minimum deals and pretty much hope they can be effective. Now, the good news is you do have Kevin Durant, and people are going to be like, okay, if I can play with Kevin Durant, maybe I can compete for a ring. That's what you have going for you. But again, we saw what happened with the Los Angeles Lakers, which Zeeshan will allude to a little later. It doesn't always work out. So getting some rotation guys who ideally could defend but also be effective in general is going to be crucial. And then finally, this is just something that I wanted to throw in there just because why the hell not? Can you get Ben Simmons to do his damn job? Please? Get him to at least play a game. Make that $35 million actually worth something. The guy hasn't played basketball in almost 2 years.
Young socialite.
Whatever he wants to call himself, whatever the jargon is. He's still trying to fight to get his money back from the Sixers as if, he actually did something to deserve his money back. I don't understand that concept. And the reality, and he didn't even play for the Nets, which I completely saw it coming. The Nets thought they were getting a guy, okay, he can come in, he'll play for us in a new situation. He didn't even play.
And again, the worst part was that he was actually ramping up to play. And then the Nets started losing games in the playoffs, and they lost the first 2 games. And that's when you realize, oh, damn, we might not win the series. I'm not coming back.
Yeah, and again, he faked back injuries and stuff. I don't know how you can get a back injury when you don't play, but man, I guess sitting on your ass is tougher than it looks.
Oh, that's what Westbrook said.
I guess so, man. But yeah, man, getting Ben Simmons to actually play is going to be crucial because He changes what you do in this offseason. If he actually plays and he actually fits, then you might have something here. Then you don't
Small ball center.
Exactly. Or at very least a 6'10" point guard. Like, so we'll see what happens in this. But those were their team needs, at least from my perspective. Bringing us into the draft. And they have no picks. They traded their first rounder to the Houston Rockets in the James Harden deal that only lasted a year. And then they traded their second rounder to the Detroit Pistons, which was probably also part of the James Harden deal. So, yeah, Brooklyn has no picks. Yeah, not surprised. Bringing us finally into the potential moves that the Nets could make heading into this offseason. And I think the first thing that they want to kind of explore is potentially doing a sign-and trade with Kyrie Irving. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that his value is pretty low. You need to give teams an incentive to take on that deal while also getting a player who can help you out if you're the Brooklyn Nets. Now, this depends on the cooperation of all parties involved, but when you think about a player I think Bradley Beal would be an interesting one. Because again, the Wizards don't want to be irrelevant, but they don't want to lose Bradley Beal for nothing. Bradley Beal wants to play for a contender. He'd be a good fit next to Kevin Durant. And Kyrie Irving, that money will still be able to sell tickets for the Washington Wizards. So it might not be out of the realm of possibility to see a potential sign and trade or have both players opt in and just trade them for each other. Worst case, it's a 1-year deal for each player. So that one is an interesting one. The second guy I think is Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine would definitely be interesting next to Kevin Durant. They already have that Olympic connection, but I think LaVine would be interesting. Now you pair Kyrie Irving in Chicago with DeMar. I don't see that as a bad option for the Bulls either. Because even if he doesn't play, you still have Lonzo, you still have Caruso, you still got guys who can, fill the point guard spot. So I don't hate the idea. And again, it just really hinges on do these teams want to work together, and do these players and their teams involved want to work with each other.
Well, that's the thing. So your point about Kyrie Irving getting traded, as I mentioned earlier on in the episode, is he actually going to play if he gets traded? And I don't think so, if I'm going to be honest. If we remember, a couple years ago, both KD and Kyrie, they both said they want to retire at 35. I don't know if that's going to happen for KD, but Kyrie, I can definitely see that happening. And especially if he goes to another team, not the Brooklyn Nets, I could see this guy straight up just dipping from the NBA.
Yeah, and again, that's the risk factor. And that's why you might have to attach a first or a second rounder with Kyrie Irving to make it something like this work. But again, it's just a potential idea to throw out there. Speaking of some other free agents that the Nets can go after, and this is a name that you've heard a lot in these episodes, but Gary Harris, again, he just seems like that guy who can bring you value defensively. He's not going to be crazy expensive. And if that 3-ball can start to go in, you can have an effective player right there. And he's young, so he fits kind of the age that I'm trying to go for the Brooklyn Nets. So he'd be an interesting option. Another guy to be Thomas Bryant. Now, I don't know how much of a what type of contract he would demand, but when you're talking about purely from the standpoint that he's a center that is young and can probably fit what the Nets are trying to do, he'd be definitely a good option for them. Another guy would be Jeremy Lamb. He's a guy you can sign for the minimum, probably wants to play for a contender, and might actually be effective. Another guy would be Avery Bradley. He's played for the Lakers before, so he knows disappointment very well. But he can come to the Nets, and again, he's a solid defender. He can stretch the floor. So Avery Bradley can definitely be an interesting one. Another good name I threw out there was Ricky Rubio, and he might want a chance to play for a contender, especially since he lost out on that big payday with that ACL injury after he was having basically a career season. But I think, especially when you let go of pretty much if Patty Mills decides to leave and, higher ambitions tries to go to higher ambitions again, you might need a guy to replace that. So getting Ricky Rubio wouldn't be a bad option.
Here's the thing. Guys who are role players on championship contenders, if they perform decently well, they usually get pay raises.
Yeah.
And Ricky Rubio, I would bet, is looking for at least some sort of prove-it deal to prove, coming off of his ACL tear, that he can get back to the level that he was a year ago. And then get a contract.
But he's serviceable on a contending team. So that's why I wouldn't mind that at all. And then finally, the last name I kind of just threw in there as kind of maybe a guy you can go after. He's a veteran guy who's still effective, and it's JaMychal Green. Now, JaMychal Green, again, he'll cost you a little bit more, but in terms of a guy who can come in, he can come off your bench, he can score, he can defend. JaMychal Green wouldn't be a bad option with the Brooklyn Nets. But overall, man, the Nets are in a pretty tough spot right now. A lot of their decisions really come down to what do you do with Kyrie Irving and will Ben Simmons actually play for you? Because once you know what those two situations are, then you can start to build the team out, respectively. But again, Kevin Durant isn't getting any younger. I don't think he's getting any happier either. So you have to appease Kevin Durant. So we'll see what happens with the Brooklyn Nets, but it's a tough situation.
Yeah, and if we're talking about the Brooklyn Nets being in a tough situation, the Los Angeles Lakers are in a much worse situation, I would say.
There's a definition of a tough situation.
Yeah, they're just it's
bad.
It's bad.
It's bad.
It's very bad. They finished 33-49 this past season. They didn't even make the play-in tournament, let alone the playoffs.
That's bad.
They were 11th in the Western Conference. They had the 23rd offensive rating in the league and were ranked 21st in defensive rating. So they were bottom 10 on both sides of the court. And they came into a year with championship expectations. That's like the worst part about it.
Well, every LeBron team comes in with championship expectations.
Exactly. And we mentioned this earlier in the season too, or in the offseason actually, last offseason. They had a bunch of clear flaws, right? The Russell Westbrook experiment, it could go either well or terribly wrong.
And it went terribly wrong.
Exactly, went terribly wrong. They had a terrible year, and everything that could have gone wrong basically went wrong. Injuries, Russell Westbrook being bad, always disabled, playing like always disabled. LeBron was amazing for the games that he played, but he
got hurt as well.
By injuries too. Again, he's 37 at this point. If you're asking him to carry a team like he did in 2018 or in 2007, that's not going to happen anymore.
Well, LeBron's going into year 20.
Exactly.
Dude, do you really get a year 20 LeBron? Nobody even expected a year 20 Jordan to do it. And he didn't even make it to year 20.
I mean, this is literally the best old player we've ever seen. For sure. Yeah. Right? Nobody's been better at this stage of their career than LeBron James, by far. Right? The only comparable person would be Kareem, who was averaging like 14, 15 points at this stage of his career.
Yeah.
Right? They were basically bottom of the league in every statistical category except for blocks. They had to have LeBron average 30 points a game just for them to not get blown out on every game basis.
Yeah, that's bad.
Like I said, always disabled, played 40 games. He averaged 23 points, which is all right, but when you actually look at the games that he was playing, he was not good.
Yo, I have a problem with Anthony Davis. I'm sorry. If you were touted as a top 5 talent in the league like a season or two ago, but you can't even A, play more than half the season without getting hurt, and B, shoot that pathetically from 3, I'm sorry, man.
18%.
Dude, you're
for a
top 15 big talent at best now. Considering how much talent has been influxed into the league, you got to play. The best ability is availability. And Anthony Davis has shown throughout his career he is not available at all.
And again, it bleeds into his play on the court because he's always playing tentative, right? He's always playing scared. And you can tell when he's on the court because he's scared to drive inside the paint. He's scared to bang with the big guys because he knows he's going to get injured. And that bleeds into his play. He's not aggressive on the offensive end. He doesn't want to take risks, right? And so you have a lesser version of Anthony Davis than what he could be. You compare Anthony Davis this past season, how he looked, compared to what he looked like in his New Orleans playing days. It's a completely different player. The two guys look completely different, right? Yep. And so it just was not a good season for Anthony Davis, and he needs to get back to what he was doing. Now, apparently, he hasn't shot a ball since like April 6th or something.
Well, I mean, he's at the point now where Lakers fans are basically just clamoring to trade him at this point because, again, they know they can't trade Westbrook, which we'll probably get into, but you got to get rid of one of them. And
I've mentioned this before, too. Anthony Davis wasn't brought in to just be LeBron's co-star. He was brought in to be LeBron's successor on the Lakers. And it looks like that's not going to happen because LeBron, and going into year 20, is still clearly the number one guy on the team when it should have been a 1A, 1B option at this stage of both of their careers with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. That's clearly not happened, and that clearly won't happen, I think, after LeBron leaves the Lakers. If he retires or goes to another team, whatever he does. Anthony Davis is not that guy to carry the Lakers into the future.
The Lakers were so lucky that they got that bubble season, because if they didn't win that championship, dude, I don't know if AD is still on the team. Like, I don't even know LeBron's still there, to be honest with you, because it would have been just a colossal failure overall.
And then we talk about Russell Westbrook. Now, I'm not going to talk about Russell Westbrook too much right now because we've mentioned it like every time we've talked about the Lakers, and it's been talked about to death. Westbrook's stats by the end of the season might have looked okay, but he was terrible.
Yeah,
he was terrible. It was a terrible fit for the team.
As we kind of expected.
He was bad on the offensive end. He was a black hole, right? He couldn't shoot the ball. He couldn't finish at the rim. He had a crazy amount of turnovers. On the defensive end, he was as bad as we've ever seen, right? Like, Russell Westbrook has never been a good defender in the NBA, and he was absolutely terrible this past season. And yeah, like I said, it was a terrible fit on both ends of the court. The role players they brought in, you look at the names, you're like, okay, not bad. But then they're all like 95 years old. They were all injured by the end of the season. The Lakers were literally running G League lineups by the end of the season.
We joked in the last offseason when the Lakers signed all the guys. We were like, yo, this is the retirement home. Because every old veteran player you can possibly think of ended up on the Lakers, and they were old and washed.
How do you have a championship contender starting guys like Austin Reeves, Stanley Johnson, and Wenyen Gabriel? Now, shout out to all those guys. They performed admirably in their roles. But you cannot be considered a championship contender if you're starting guys like that. That's never going to happen, right? And that's kind of the situation that the Lakers were in by the end of the season. The only bright spots on the team, I would say, were Malik Monk, who actually will get a pay raise. Austin Reeves showed what he can do on the NBA level. And Stanley Johnson, Wenyen Gabriel carved themselves NBA roles. Like, they're NBA players officially. I think they performed pretty well in their roles. Shout out Stanley Johnson, former Raptor. And all of this resulted in, of course, the head coach getting axed. Frank Vogel got axed.
We expected this.
They brought in Darvin Ham. Now, again, Frank Vogel, I gave him a lot of credit during their championship season. It's kind of looking like Jason Kidd. And the report said this as well. Jason Kidd had a lot to do with that championship. And looking at Frank Vogel coaching this past season, now, again, it's not completely his fault because Rob Pelinka put a terrible team around him. But some of his decision-making, I just did not understand. And you look at what Jason Kidd did in Dallas comparatively this year, and it's really looking like there has to be a lot of that championship credit gone to Jason Kidd.
Listen, I'm not going to put 100% blame on Frank Vogel, but I am going to give him at least 65% of the blame. Because ultimately speaking, you as the head coach should be able to take control of the situation, and he clearly did not do that very well. And again, you're talking about decision making. I always knew he was an average head coach. You know, he got a championship, which great for him, but he was never anything special.
And again, he was touted. He's always been a defensive coach, kind of bad on the offensive end. And when your defense is ranked 21st and you're a defensive coach, what are you really on the job for then? At that point,
nothing.
In terms of their notable free agents, basically everyone on their team besides AD and LeBron are free agents. Russell Westbrook has a player option this season for $47 million.
He'd be a fool not to pick it up.
He's picking it up. All reports indicate that. Kendrick Nunn has a player option for $5 million. He's definitely picking that up considering he didn't play this season at all. Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony, Wayne Ellington, Avery Bradley, Cam Bazemore, Malik Monk, Austin Reeves, and DJ Augustine are all unrestricted free agents. And then we have Stanley Johnson on a non-guaranteed option and Wenyen Gabriel on a team option. So, like I said, basically their whole team is hitting the free agent market. In terms of their team needs, as I talked about before, it starts with Russell Westbrook. There has to be some sort of decision with Russell Westbrook. Now, again, he is going to pick up his player option, so you're very limited in what you can do. The only option I see to get rid of Russell Westbrook is that John Wall trade, which, incidentally, they got traded for each other not too long ago. And they're basically the only guys that can be traded for each other. John Wall is basically in the exact same situation financially as Russell Westbrook. And that's why those two literally, the only option is for them to swap teams.
But John Wall, to be honest with you, could actually fit better with the Lakers than Russell Westbrook.
I think it would be a better fit. So I think the Lakers, Rob Pelinka should really try exploring that. I don't know how much better it will be, but I think anything is better than this. right?
Yeah.
Now, if Russell Westbrook is on the team and Rob Pelinka can't pull that trade off, I think you have to look at either putting Russell Westbrook on the bench completely or just playing him with the bench unit. Now, he famously did not want to do this last season, but I think at this point, Darvin Ham has to say, listen, it's not working for you in the starting lineup. You have to play with the bench unit. I don't care if you're making $47 million. Anything is better than what happened last year. And so I think Russell Westbrook needs to get over the Allen Iverson thing, right? Of, oh, I want to start. I'm not coming off of the bench, blah, blah, blah. Melo got over it. I think Russell Westbrook, it's his time to get over it.
And I think that's the biggest challenge for Darvin Ham is really controlling all of these egos of these players, man. Because you're not telling LeBron to take a step back at all, but you gotta tell AD, like, can you stay healthy, please? Can you play more than 40 games in a season for us, please? Russell Westbrook, can you come off the bench or take a reduced role? Like, those are the type of things that Darvin Ham is going to have to establish from day one. He's already saying the right things and obviously his press conferences and stuff, but we got to see it to believe
Westbrook needs to reestablish himself and what he wants to be in the NBA. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this year because he's still on that $47 million deal. But I think next season, in the offseason, when he sees the offers come in and the type of roles he's going to have to take, I think he's going to have to get over it, similar to what happened to Carmelo Anthony, right, after New York. And he's going to have to accept what he is in the NBA at this point. Like I said, this is why I'm saying this season I think the Lakers are screwed. Like, let me just be clear. I don't know how much the Lakers can do this season. I think it'll be a wash season. They can make internal improvements in terms of everyone playing better, Russell Westbrook hopefully playing better, Anthony Davis playing, and LeBron being LeBron, but I think this season is going to be a wash season, unfortunately. In terms of actual roster decision-making, Rob Pelinka, of course, needs to get some shooting around LeBron James, Anthony Davis, particularly with Westbrook on the court, who's a terrible, terrible shooter. Anthony Davis has completely lost his shot as well. LeBron James was basically the team's best three-point shooter, obviously besides like Wayne Ellington and Carmelo Anthony. But in terms of volume-wise, LeBron James was the best shooter on the team, right? So that's not exactly ideal if you're the Lakers. You want to get some shooting around LeBron James, be able to have him utilize his passing ability, kickouts, which he was not able to do this past season. You also want to be able to get younger, not be old. We call it the retirement home. Charles Barkley, Charles Barkley has roasted the hell out of the Lakers for this.
Charles Barkley.
Shout out Charles Barkley. The Lakers are they were the oldest team in the league this past season, and
one of the worst.
It looked like it on a daily basis because they were not able to keep up on the offensive end. They were not able to run out.
And they kept getting injured.
And they could not keep up at all on the defensive end. They need to get AD in shape. Hani talked about this before. Tell him to either... Here's the thing. When he played that power forward spot, he was noticeably slimmer. He had less muscle than what he does now. So the thing is, if you want to play him, if he wants to keep continuing at that power forward spot, he's going to have to slim down because more muscle mass equals more injuries on his knees, right? And so if you want him to play the power forward spot, he's got to slim down. But on the alternate side, he's best suited for a center role at this stage of his career. And so he needs to keep that muscle mass up, especially when there isn't many good centers on the market, right? You don't have the option to have like a good, semi-good Dwight Howard at this stage of his career anymore like you did in the championship season. JaVale McGee would be a good target for the Lakers to get in free agency, but he's going to want to go to a contender. So Anthony Davis will have to play the center spot, and he's going to have to keep that muscle mass, unfortunately. And he hasn't shown that he can handle it thus far in his few seasons that he's been on the Lakers, right? So you're going to need to work with the training staff to keep him healthy, be able to maintain his muscle, and his new body weight playing the center position. It's just something he's going to have to deal with, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think in general, like with Westbrook and LeBron, it's better that he plays the center spot playing the three together because that's still going to be more effective, especially if AD can actually regain some form of his shot, which, again, it shouldn't all be gone. He was a decent shooter before last season. So, if he can regain some of that and play the center spot, that solves a lot of the Lakers' interior logjam. issues.
And then finally, I think you have to at least, two-way players are great and you want to have them in the NBA. But I think Rob Pelinka needs to look at just, first of all, committing to one side of the court. Because that's what the championship Lakers did. They committed to the defensive end, and the offensive end, they were like, we'll figure it out. We got LeBron James, we got AD. Their offense wasn't pretty, but it worked enough to get a championship. Why? Because their defense was really good. They had an identity. Their identity was that they're a big team. They're going to play Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Kyle Kuzma. 6'9" guys, all big bodies. Rajon Rondo, a big body at the point guard position. They were going to play big. They were going to play intimidating on the defensive end. They're going to play paint-oriented offense and defense, and that got them to a championship because they had a clear structure of what they wanted to do. This past season, the Lakers had no identity. One game they would be doing one thing, the next game they would be trying something else, right? And this was basically throughout the entire season. Each game would bring a different set of philosophies on both ends of the court. And you can't do that. You need to have a consistent game plan that carries you into the playoffs and then carries you to a championship. Teams like Golden State do that. Golden State knows what they are, knows what they aren't. Boston knows what they are, knows what they aren't, right? The Lakers need to get back to that, and that starts with committing to one sort of game plan. And that's what Rob Pelinka needs to understand, right? Not just get as much talent as you can, because that's shown it doesn't work. You need to be able to commit to one game plan. So either go completely offensive, get some scoring, or just try to do what you did in your championship season, which is start with the defensive end, and you have LeBron, you have AD, you have Westbrook ideally, and you figure it out from there on the offensive end. And then finally, we're talking about potential moves. Now, the Lakers are pretty cap strapped, right? They don't have any draft picks. So they're very limited in what they can do. All their top three guys, Anthony Davis is making $37 million this season. LeBron's making over 40. And we talked about Russell Westbrook making $47 million this season. So the Lakers have no room financially, basically. And they need to basically do what they did last season, which is get a bunch of minimum guys.
But do it right this time.
Which is why I said I think this is a wash season for them, because they can't really get better. Now, ideally, they would love to re-sign Malik Monk because he was one of their few bright spots last season. I don't think they're going to be able to re-sign him because I think he's going to go to a different team for a pay raise. Austin Reeves as well, Wayne Ellington. Austin Reeves, I think, is a guy you want to re-sign. He's a young player. He looked quite good in his rookie season. Wayne Ellington, Avery Bradley are two of your vets that you could bring back. Wayne Ellington, I think, in his role, I think he's still pretty solid. He showed that last season for me. It's just I think he was asked to do a bit too much when he was on the court. If you have him simply, hiding on the defensive end and then running off of screens for threes on the offensive end, play him 10 minutes a game, I think that works quite well for Wayne Ellington. If you're playing him more than that, I don't think that's going to work out. Avery Bradley had his moments, but he was kind of looking washed, right? So it's a possibility. And then I'll list off a number of veterans that the Lakers could go after, or young guys, just cheaper deals. I mentioned JaVale McGee. I don't think it's going to happen.
No.
Bismack Biyombo, we've mentioned him a couple of times in the last few episodes. I think it would be a good vet presence, a good starting or a good center option to have, especially since the Lakers had no centers this past season. Damian Jones, he was on the Lakers last season, I think. And so, he's a serviceable young guy. Damian Lee, Josh Jackson, Austin Rivers, Tony Snell, and Daniel House are all younger players on the wings who could be serviceable in their roles, right? Like I mentioned, the Lakers, this is basically a wash season for them. They don't really have much options. And I think if you're a Lakers fan, you just got to deal with this season and see what the next season brings when Russell Westbrook isn't on this team and LeBron, I think, has one more year afterwards. Either way, I think the main takeaway from these two teams, the Lakers and the Brooklyn Nets, is that I think we've entered a new era in the NBA where it's not just you can grab a top-heavy team.
You can't buy your team.
You can't buy your team. I think that's where we've entered in the NBA. I think teams have realized that having a duo of stars plus good role players is more effective in winning a championship than it is to have three guys at the top and just fill out the roster.
And more sustainable long term as well. When you're talking about teams like Golden State, the reason why they're able to sustain the level of success because again, their core guys hasn't changed, but they've developed guys along the way and have a system in place. So now every time they lose a guy, they bring another player in, and then they just keep building up that way.
Well, Golden State also developed their core as
Exactly.
well, right? So Golden State is literally the blueprint of what you want to follow.
Even Boston, to a lesser degree, Toronto does that pretty well. There are a bunch of teams that do that, to develop homegrown talent. Miami is also good at that as well. So there's a bunch of these newer style teams that are coming in now that are bringing that building mentality where you have to build a team. You can't buy it. You can't just make it appear out of thin air. And I think the Lakers have always been that. They've always been the personification of the Hollywood team. Oh, we're going to go out and buy this guy. We're going to go out and get Shaq. We're going to go out and get all these other guys. It's not going to always work. You know what worked? You drafted Kobe Bryant and you developed him into the superstar that he was.
Exactly.
That's what works.
Exactly.
You got Pau Gasol and you developed him to be one of the best bigs of all time. You did that.
Well, I mean, Powell's kind of different. They trade for him.
Well, it doesn't matter. But you still made that move, and he still got better with the Lakers as a whole. So either way, like, you're right. We're entering in a new era now, and it's time for these teams to actually get with the program or continue to stew in mediocrity.
Yep.
But yeah, so those were our what's next for the Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Lakers. Let us know if you agree or disagree. What would you do to help fix these teams? Let us know either in the comment section on YouTube or on social media. Bringing us finally into the up and under segment for this week. Again, with the NBA Finals going on, it's a bit of a dry spell for some news, although slowly we are getting some things kind of happening.
Next up, are you up or under on Quinn Snyder resigning as the head coach of the Utah Jazz?
I'm up on it. I think it was bound to happen. I mean, we expected from the rumors that Quinn Snyder and the Jazz were going to be coming to a split. And honestly, I just think the voice got stale. I just think there was just too much turmoil in Utah that I think both parties decided that it's just best to part ways now. And I think Quinn Snyder is going to be in demand for some other coaching jobs for sure, just because of the job that he did in Utah. He basically turned around the franchise after the whole Darren Williams era and basically helped build out this era where the Jazz have become a consistent playoff team, a consistent winner. But now the Jazz have now entered that little, I guess, that mediocrity phase where they need to either get better immediately or retool the roster in some way. But I think, yeah, Quinn Snyder stepping down, not surprised by that. And I think hopefully if they hire the right guy and maybe address some of the roster concerns, we can see the Jazz in a better place next season. But we'll see what happens. And finally, are you up or under on Pat Riley challenging Kyle Lowry to be in better shape next season? Essentially saying that it was Kyle Lowry's fault, the fact that he wasn't under an 18% BMI rating or whatever, body fat percentage, that the Miami Heat weren't as good as they could have been.
I'm gonna be honest, I'm up on it because it's kind of true. It is true. Let's be honest.
Listen, I'm under because Kyle Lowry became a 7-time All-Star with this weight. It's not his weight. That wasn't the only problem with the Miami Heat.
He was injured, and again, Kyle Lowry, he's getting up there in age. His weight is not going to be able to sustain itself at this stage of his career anymore. He has to slim down. It's pretty fast, right? Again, Miami has a stringent, off-season routine in terms of body fat percentage and whatnot. And again, Kyle Lowry's issues weren't the only struggle for the team, but him being healthy, I think, would have gone a long way in Miami being as good as they could have been. And plus, Pat Riley, again, Kyle Lowry's going to take the challenge. Kyle Lowry knows that too. He's talked about it. He said, he's admitted that as well. And I think people need to realize that, Kyle Lowry isn't the same. This isn't Toronto where he's going to be able to get away with that. And Kyle Lowry's also not the same Kyle Lowry as he was in Toronto. And also, Pat Riley's Pat Riley. Again, when you're talking about Pat Riley's been there. He's done that. Nobody's going to say no. But you see,
my thing is that Pat Riley, you paid this guy $30 million a season for the next 3 years. You knew what you were getting. Now, maybe you thought you can change who Kyle Lowry is, but the reality is Kyle Lowry became Kyle Lowry playing the way he does. Now, yes, there's personal issues, there were injuries, that stuff I don't disagree with. Maybe he can slim down a little bit. But the fact that you're alluding to that was your biggest issue.
Well, he didn't say that.
I don't care if he didn't say that. He basically alluded to it.
Well, not really.
That that was he needs to slim down. Like,
well, he didn't really say it. He said it was one of the issues. He didn't say that was the biggest issue.
Yeah, I don't really trust Pat Riley for that one. But either way, could Kyle Lowry come back in better shape? Absolutely, and I think he will take the challenge from Pat Riley because he really doesn't like it when front offices call him out. Hence Toronto. But I don't know. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way that I'm like, you knew what you were doing when you signed him, right? But it is what it is. The Miami Heat clearly have some things to do. If you want to see what we think they should do, check out last week's episode. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course YouTube. Definitely subscribe to the show so you don't miss great episodes from us in the future. We'll be covering more off-season stuff as the season kind of wraps up, which will be, I guess, very soon. What are we at? Game 4 of the NBA Finals that just happened. So again, more off-season content coming your way. So stay tuned for that. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at _N_podcast, Facebook.com/UpAndUnderPodcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news as they occur. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. Also, check out our website, UpAndUnderPodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode, so if you don't have time to listen or watch the full episode, you can read about it on our website. Every episode is templated with the video, the audio, and the written version all in one place for you guys. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, the NBA Finals is still going on. We are yet to crown a winner. At least we're at a tie series. It's
a good finals, man. I'm not gonna lie, it's been a good finals.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting to say the least. But again, still hate both teams. So, don't really care who wins. But either way, that's it for this one. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely, and yeah, stay tuned for more content in the future, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.